I wish we'd gotten more for the house, but I guess the market's cooling, I heard my father say, his voice drifting through the partially open kitchen door. I had just arrived for our weekly Sunday dinner, letting myself in as I always did at the craftsman home that had been in our family for 3 generations. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. Robert, keep your voice down, my mother whispered urgently. Jessica doesn't know yet. We agreed to tell her after everything's finalized. The buyer's already signed and the money hits our account on Wednesday. Well, it's not like she has any say in the matter. This house has been in my name since my father passed it to me. Besides, she has her fancy downtown apartment. She doesn't need this place, and we need the money for our retirement. I just hope she understands. She's always been so emotional about this house. Remember how she spent her college summers restoring that built-in cabinetry? At least the developers promised not to tear it down right away. I froze in the hallway, the bottle of wine I'd brought slipping from my fingers and landing silently on the thick Persian rug. Developers? Tear it down? My parents had sold our family home without even telling me? I backed away silently, my heart pounding so loud I was certain they would hear it. I slipped out the front door, closing it with exquisite care, and texted my mother from the safety of my car. Emergency at work. Rain check on dinner. Love you. My name is Jessica Miller. I'm 32 years old, and until 10 minutes ago, I believed my parents respected me enough to discuss major family decisions. I'm an architect specializing in historical preservation, and the 1923 Craftsman home where I grew up in Portland's Selwood neighborhood isn't just a house to me. It's the physical embodiment of our family's history. Every corner of that house tells a story. The height markings on the kitchen door frame tracking my growth, the window seat in the living room where my grandmother taught me to knit, the hand-carved banister my grandfather restored after the small fire in the 70s, the built-in cabinets I had painstakingly brought back to their original glory during college, applying everything I was learning in my architecture program. And now my parents had sold it to developers, without so much as mentioning it to me. I sat in my car, parked a block away, trying to process what I'd just heard. The home where I'd taken my first steps, celebrated every birthday until college, and found my passion for historical architecture, gone with the stroke of a pen. Not just sold, but sold to people who planned to destroy it. My phone pinged with a response from my mother. No problem, sweetie. Everything okay? Dad's grilling. Your favorite salmon. The casual normalcy of her text made my stomach clench. How long had they been planning this? How could they sit across from me at Sunday dinners for weeks, months, knowing they were selling my childhood home out from under me, and never say a word? I started my car and drove aimlessly, eventually finding myself at Morning Brew, the coffee shop where I'd spent countless hours studying during architecture school. The familiar environment did little to calm the storm of emotions, betrayal, anger, grief, swirling inside me. Almost on autopilot, I called my best friend Mark Wilson. Mark and I had been friends since undergrad, and he was now a real estate attorney at a firm downtown. "The house sold?" he asked after I explained what I'd overheard. "Your parents' house? And they didn't tell you?" "Apparently to developers," I said, my voice surprisingly steady. "I heard my mom say something about tearing it down." "That's... Wow, Jess. I'm sorry. I know how much that place means to you." There was a pause. "What are you going to do?" "I don't know. What can I do? It's their house." There was a longer pause on Mark's end. "Actually, I seem to remember you mentioning once that your grandmother put your name on something related to the house before she died." The memory hit me like a physical blow. 10 years ago, my maternal grandmother Eleanor had called me to her bedside. In the weeks before she passed, "Jessica," she'd said, her once strong voice barely a whisper, "this house should pass to someone who loves it as much as I do. I've spoken to my lawyer. You're on the deed now, alongside your parents. Promise me you'll protect it." I had promised, but in the grief that followed her death, I'd never actually seen any paperwork. My parents had handled everything, and I assumed my grandmother had either changed her mind or been mistaken. I hadn't thought about it in years. "Mark, I think you're right, but I never saw any documentation. It was just something she told me. It's worth checking. If your name is on the deed, even as a partial owner, they can't sell without your signature. Meet me at my office tomorrow at 9. We'll figure this out." That night, I barely slept in my downtown apartment. The space that had once felt so sophisticated and adult, exposed brick walls, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the Willamette River, now felt cold and impersonal compared to the warm woodwork and character of my childhood home. I scrolled through photos on my phone. Me at age 8 sitting on the front porch steps with our dog Rusty, my high school graduation party in the backyard, my sister Sarah and me decorating the living room Christmas tree. Each image was not just a memory, but a physical space, a room, a detail of a house that had shaped who I was. The next morning, I met Mark at his office in the Pearl District. He had already been working for hours, judging by the coffee cups on his desk. "I've got good news and complicated news," he said as soon as I sat down. "The good news is that I was able to access the property records for your parents' address. And yes, your name is indeed on the deed. Your grandmother added you a month before she died, with your parents remaining as co-owners." My heart leapt. So they can't sell without my consent? Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. That's the complicated part. They shouldn't be able to, no. But the sale is already in progress, which means they somehow did. Either your signature was forged or what? Mark looked uncomfortable. Or they found a way to remove your name before the sale. I need to dig deeper into the chain of title. There should be records of any changes to the deed. How long will that take? A few days normally. But I know someone at the county recorder's office who owes me a favor. Give me until this afternoon. I left Mark's office and wandered down to the waterfront, my mind racing. Had my parents knowingly sold a house that was partly mine? Or had they somehow never known about my grandmother's actions? Neither scenario made sense. If they knew, how could they betray me like this? If they didn't know, how could they have successfully sold the property? My phone rang. It was my sister Sarah, 5 years older than me and always the family peacemaker. "Mom says you bailed on dinner last night. Everything okay?" I hesitated. Sarah had moved to Seattle years ago, with her husband and kids. She visited often, but didn't have the same emotional attachment to the house that I did. Would she take our parents' side? "Not really," I admitted. "I overheard Mom and Dad talking yesterday. They've sold the house to developers." There was a long pause. "Oh, wow. They finally did it." Her words hit me like a slap. "Finally? You knew about this?" Another pause. "They mentioned they were thinking about it when I visited last month. I assumed they'd discussed it with you too." The betrayal deepened. Not just my parents, but my sister too, keeping me in the dark. "Well, they didn't," I said, unable to keep the hurt from my voice. "And there's more. I think my name might be on the deed. Grandma Eleanor added me before she died." "That can't be right," Sarah said immediately. "Mom and Dad would have known if you were a co-owner. There must be some mistake." "I'm looking into it," I said tightly. "I've got to go." I hung up before she could respond. By mid-afternoon, Mark called me back to his office, his expression grave but determined, the look he got when preparing for court. "I've found something," he said, spreading documents across his desk. "Your name was indeed added to the deed 10 years ago, making you a 1/3 owner alongside your parents. So they couldn't sell without me," I said, feeling a surge of hope. "Correct. Except..." He pointed to another document. 6 months ago, a quit-claim deed was filed, supposedly transferring your interest back to your parents, and it has your signature on it. He pushed the paper toward me, and there it was, a reasonable facsimile of my signature on a legal document I had never seen before. "I didn't sign this," I whispered, staring at the forgery. "I didn't think so," Mark said grimly. "Which means we're dealing with fraud. The question is, did your parents forge your signature, or did they somehow believe you had actually signed this?" I stared at the signature again. It was close to mine, but not exact. The J was too looped, the crossing of the T too high. Someone who knew my handwriting but wasn't an expert forger. "What do we do now?" I asked. "First, we file for an emergency injunction to stop the sale. Then we gather more evidence about this forged quit-claim deed." Mark hesitated. "Jess, I need to ask, how far are you willing to take this? These are your parents we're talking about." The question brought me up short. These were my parents, the people who had raised me, supported me through school, celebrated my successes. But they had also tried to erase me from my own family. Legacy had forged my signature, had lied to me for months while planning to sell my childhood home to developers who would destroy it. "I need to know the truth," I finally said. "And I need to protect that house. It's not just about me, it's about my grandmother's wishes too." Mark nodded. "Then we'll need more help. I know a forensic document examiner who can authenticate that this signature is a forgery. And you should talk to Olivia Chen. She's a real estate expert who specializes in historical properties. She might have insights about the developers and what they're planning." As I left Mark's office, my phone buzzed with a text from my mother. "Haven't heard from you. Everything okay? Dad and I have some news we'd like to share this weekend." "Dinner Saturday?" Some news. As if selling my childhood home was just an interesting update, like a new recipe or a vacation plan. I didn't respond. Instead, I called Olivia Chen, whom I knew professionally through Portland's historical preservation circles. She agreed to meet me immediately at Morning Brew. "The Selwood Craftsman?" she said when I described the house. "On Maple Street? I know that property. It's architecturally significant, one of the few intact examples of that style with original features. There's been talk of nominating several homes on that street for historical designation, which would prevent demolition," I said, seeing a potential avenue. "Exactly. But the process takes time, months at minimum." She frowned. "The developers who bought it. Did you say Westbrook Properties?" I nodded. "That's the name I overheard." Olivia's expression darkened. "They're known for moving fast. They buy, demolish, and break ground on new construction within weeks of closing. They've destroyed 3 historically significant properties in Portland in the past year alone, always just before preservation efforts could be completed." My stomach dropped. "So even with an injunction on the sale, we'd need to fast-track the historical designation process." She pulled out her laptop. "Let me make some calls. The Preservation Board owes me a few favors." That night, I finally responded to my mother's text. "Sorry, slammed with work. Can't make Saturday." No mention of what I knew or what I was planning. Let them think I was still in the dark. The next morning, I met with Daniel Garcia, the forensic document examiner Mark had recommended. He examined the quitclaim deed carefully under various lights and magnifications. "This is definitely not your authentic signature," he confirmed after comparing it to several known examples of my handwriting. "The pressure points are wrong, and there are hesitation marks consistent with forgery. I can prepare an official report. For court." "How long will that take?" I asked. 3 days? maybe 2 if I push it. The sale closes on Wednesday, I said, panic rising. I'll have it by tomorrow afternoon, Daniel promised. While I waited for his report, I dove into research about the house itself. If we were going to pursue historical designation, I needed documentation of its significance. I spent hours at the city archives, tracking down the original 1923 building plans, photographs from different eras, and the name of the architect, Frederick Winters, who I discovered had designed several notable buildings in Portland. I also found newspaper clippings mentioning my great-grandfather's purchase of the house in 1945, and how it had been one of the first homes in the area to welcome a family of Japanese-American origin back after the internment camps. My great-grandfather had stood against neighborhood opposition, making our home a small but significant part of Portland's civil rights history. By Tuesday afternoon, I had amassed a compelling historical case. Olivia had secured an emergency hearing with the Preservation Board. Daniel had completed his forgery analysis, and Mark had filed for the injunction to stop the sale. The final piece came when Mark called with news about the developers. Westbrook Properties has already filed for demolition permits, he said. They're planning to break ground on a 6-unit luxury condo building next month. But here's the interesting part. They filed those permits 3 months ago. 3 months? I repeated. But how could they file for permits before even buying the property? Exactly. Unless they already had an agreement with the owners, your parents, dating back that far. Which means your parents have been planning this for at least that long. The revelation sent a fresh wave of hurt through me. 3 months of Sunday dinners, family birthdays, casual conversations, all while they were actively planning to sell my childhood home, forge my signature, and allow developers to demolish a piece of history. The injunction hearing is tomorrow morning, Mark continued. The judge will review our evidence of fraud and the historical significance. Your parents will be notified of the action today. Are you prepared for their reaction? I wasn't. Not really. But I had come too far to back down now. I guess I'll find out, I said, just as my phone lit up with my father's name on the screen. In fact, I think I'm about to find out right now. I answered the call, my heart pounding. Jessica. My father's voice was tight, controlled. We've just received some very disturbing legal documents. Something about you claiming ownership of our house? What is the meaning of this? I think we need to have a conversation, Dad, I said, keeping my voice steady. In person, with Mark, my attorney. Your attorney? My father's voice rose. This is a family matter. It became a legal matter when someone forged my signature on a quitclaim deed, I replied. We can meet at Mark's office at 5 today. There was a long silence. Your mother and I will be there, he finally said, his voice cold in a way I'd never heard before. The meeting was set. In a few hours, I would face my parents and finally get answers about why they had tried to erase me from my own family home, and whether there was any way to salvage our relationship after such a profound betrayal. Mark's office felt unnaturally quiet as we waited for my parents to arrive. The sleek conference room with its glass table and views of the Portland skyline seemed too formal, too cold for what was essentially a family implosion. I fidgeted with my coffee cup, rehearsing what I might say, how I might react to whatever explanations they offered. Remember, Mark said quietly, arranging documents in front of him. Let me do most of the talking initially. Stay calm, no matter what they say. We have the facts on our side. I nodded, though staying calm felt impossible. These were my parents, the people who had taught me honesty, integrity, the importance of family. And they had forged my signature, lied to me for months, and attempted to erase me from my own inheritance. At precisely 5 hours, the receptionist called to announce their arrival. My stomach clenched as the conference room door opened and my parents walked in. They looked smaller somehow, more ordinary than the towering figures of betrayal I'd built. in my mind over the past 2 days. My father, always the businessman in his pressed shirt and polished shoes, entered first with his lawyer, a silver-haired man I recognized from their country club. My mother followed, her eyes finding mine immediately, a mixture of hurt and confusion in her expression that almost made me doubt what I knew. Almost. "Jessica," my father said stiffly, taking a seat across from me. "I hope you're prepared to explain this. Stunt." Mark intervened smoothly. "Mr. and Mrs. Miller, thank you for coming. I'm Mark Wilson, representing your daughter in this matter. I believe your counsel has received our filing?" The silver-haired lawyer nodded. "We have, though we find the allegations frankly bizarre and potentially slanderous. There's clearly been some misunderstanding." "There's no misunderstanding," Mark replied, sliding copies of the property records across the table. "As you can see, Eleanor Johnson, Mrs. Miller's mother, legally added Jessica to the deed 10 years ago, making her a 1/3 owner of the property. 6 months ago, someone filed this quitclaim deed with Jessica's forged signature, transferring her interest back to her parents." My mother gasped audibly. "That's not possible. My mother would never have—" "She did, Mom," I said, speaking, for the first time. "Grandma Eleanor told me about it before she died. She wanted to make sure the house would be protected." My father's face hardened. "This is absurd. If your name had been on the deed, we would have known." "Not necessarily," Mark countered. "The addition of Jessica's name didn't require your notification or approval, as Mrs. Johnson was a co-owner herself. And as you apparently never checked the full title history before attempting to sell, you remained unaware." "This is outrageous," my father sputtered, turning to his lawyer. "Harvey, explain to them that we've owned this house for 40 years. Linda's mother had no right." "Actually, she did," Harvey said reluctantly, examining the documents. "If she was indeed a co-owner, as these records indicate, she had the legal right to add another party to the deed." He frowned at the quitclaim deed. "Jessica, you're saying you didn't sign this document relinquishing your interest?" "I've never seen it before in my life," I said firmly. My mother looked genuinely shocked, but my father's expression had shifted from indignation to something closer to calculation. "This is all very interesting," he said, his voice artificially reasonable, but ultimately irrelevant. "Whatever confusion existed has been cleared up with the quitclaim deed. The sale is proceeding as planned." Mark slid another document across the table. "We have the expert opinion of Daniel Garcia, forensic document examiner, confirming that the signature on the quitclaim deed is a forgery. We've filed for an emergency injunction to stop the sale, which the judge has granted pending a hearing tomorrow morning." The color drained from my father's face. "You've blocked the sale?" "Temporarily," Mark confirmed. "The court will determine if fraud has occurred and whether Jessica's ownership interest is valid, which our evidence strongly suggests it is." My mother reached across the table toward me, her hand trembling slightly. "Jessica, honey, why didn't you just talk to us?" "This is all so unnecessary." The gentle reasonableness in her voice, as if I were the one being irrational, ignited something in me. "Talk to you?" I repeated incredulously. "Like you talked to me about selling my childhood home? About planning for months to let developers tear it down? About somehow acquiring my signature on a document I never saw?" My voice rose despite my best intentions. "When exactly were you planning to tell me, Mom? After the bulldozers arrived?" "We were going to tell you this weekend," my father interjected. "Once everything was finalized. We knew you'd be emotional, and we wanted to present it as a done deal to avoid, well, exactly this sort of dramatic overreaction." "Overreaction?" I stared at him in disbelief. "You forged my signature on a legal document." My father and his lawyer exchanged a glance that made my stomach drop. "No one's admitting to any forgery," Harvey said smoothly. "There could be many explanations for the discrepancy in signatures. Perhaps Jessica signed during a busy moment and doesn't recall. I never signed it, I repeated firmly. And we have expert testimony confirming the forgery, Mark added. My mother's eyes filled with tears. Jessica, you have to understand. Your father and I, we need this money for our retirement. The market is so good right now, and we've found a wonderful community in Arizona. The house. It's just a house. We've made our memories there, but it's time to move on. Her words struck me like physical blows. Just a house? The home where 4 generations of our family had lived, where every floorboard and window frame held stories, where I had found my passion for architecture and preservation, reduced to a transaction, a retirement fund. It's not just a house. To me, I said quietly. And it wasn't just a house to Grandma Eleanor either. That's why she put my name on the deed, because she knew I would protect it. My father's expression hardened. Your grandmother had no right to interfere with our property decisions from beyond the grave. And I find it very convenient that you suddenly remembered this supposed conversation right when we're finally selling. Mark intervened again. The legal facts remain, Mr. Miller. Jessica owns 1/3 of the property. The quitclaim deed appears to be fraudulent, and the sale cannot proceed without resolving these issues. My father turned to his lawyer. Harvey, options? Harvey frowned. We can contest the injunction at the hearing tomorrow, but given the evidence they've presented, he shrugged. It might be better to pursue a settlement. What kind? Of settlement? My father demanded. Mark glanced at me for permission before continuing. Jessica's primary concern is preserving the house itself, not necessarily retaining ownership. If you were willing to sell to a buyer who would commit to preservation rather than demolition, the Westbrook deal is for $950,000, my father interrupted. No preservation buyer will match that. Actually, I said, I've been working with Olivia Chen from the Historical Preservation Society. The house qualifies for landmark status, which would make it eligible for preservation grants. A conservation buyer could potentially offer a competitive price. My father dismissed this with a wave. Pie in the sky. We're talking about real money, Jessica, not your preservation fantasies. This deal closes next week. Not according to the injunction, Mark reminded him. My mother touched my father's arm lightly. Robert, perhaps we should listen to these options, if Jessica truly is part owner. My father shook her off irritably. This meeting is over. We'll see you in court tomorrow. He stood abruptly. Jessica, I hope you understand what you're doing to your family with this stunt. Your mother and I had plans for that money. Plans for our future. For our security. I matched his gaze. And what about the plans Grandma Eleanor had when she put my name on that deed? What about her wishes? My mother was a sentimental old woman who never understood the real world, my mother said suddenly, her gentle demeanor cracking to reveal something harder beneath. That house is worth nearly $1 million, Jessica. $1 million. Do you expect us to walk away from that because of some romantic notion about preserving the past? Her words shocked me more than anything. My father had said. My mother had always been the family historian, the one who kept photo albums meticulously organized, who told us stories about our ancestors. To hear her dismiss her own mother's wishes so callously felt like meeting a stranger. The past has value too, Mom, I said quietly. You taught me that. She looked away. We'll see you in court. After they left, I collapsed into my chair, emotionally drained. That was about as expected, Mark finished, gathering our documents. Your father didn't admit to the forgery, but he didn't seem surprised by it either. That's telling. Did I do the right thing? I asked, suddenly uncertain. They're my parents. They raised me, put me through college. And they forged your signature on a legal document, Mark reminded me gently. Look, Jess, I understand this is complicated. They're your family. But what they did was wrong, both legally and morally. You have every right to protect your interests, And your grandmother's wishes. I nodded, gathering my courage for the court hearing tomorrow. What happens now? Tonight, I'll prepare our presentation for the judge. You should get some rest. Mark gave me a sympathetic look. This is just the beginning. Are you sure you're ready for what comes next? Court battles can get ugly, especially when family is involved. I have to protect the house, I said firmly. Not just for me, but for everything it represents. If we let developers tear down every old building with character and history, what will be left of our city's soul? That night, unable to face my empty apartment, I drove to Selwood and parked across from my childhood home. The porch light was on, golden light spilling from the windows where my parents were presumably deciding their next move. The grand old craftsman looked just as it always had, sturdy, dignified, a testament to craftsmanship and care across generations. I thought about all the homes on this street that had already fallen to developers. Victorian ladies and craftsman beauties reduced to rubble, replaced by cookie-cutter modern boxes that maximized square footage while minimizing character. The thought of my family home suffering the same fate made my chest physically ache. My phone buzzed with a text from Sarah. Mom called crying. What have you done? Another layer of hurt. Of course they had called my sister, positioning themselves as victims. And of course she had taken their side without hearing mine. I typed a response. Stopped them from selling a house that's partly mine without my consent. We're in court tomorrow. You're welcome to attend if you want the full story. Sarah didn't respond. The next morning, I arrived at the courthouse to find my parents and their lawyer already waiting outside the designated courtroom. My mother avoided my gaze, but my father stared at me coldly, as if I were a stranger who had wronged him rather than his daughter fighting for our family legacy. To my surprise, Sarah was there too, standing awkwardly between our parents' group and where Mark waited for me. I thought I should hear both sides, she said when I approached, her expression uncertain. Mom and Dad say you're trying to ruin their retirement plans. They forged my signature to sell a house I partly own, I replied simply. I'm trying to protect our family home from being demolished. Grandma Eleanor put my name on the deed before she died. Did they mention that part? Sarah's eyes widened slightly. No, they just said you were making a frivolous claim. Ask to see the expert testimony on the forged signature, I suggested. It's all in the court filing. Before she could respond, the bailiff called our case, and we filed into the courtroom. Judge Ramona Patel, a stern-looking woman with silver-streaked black hair, studied the documents before her with a frown. I've reviewed the filings in this unusual case, she began. We have a property with apparently disputed ownership, a sale in progress that one alleged owner seeks to block, and accusations of document forgery. Let's start with the facts everyone agrees on, shall we? The facts, when laid out by a dispassionate third party, were devastating in their simplicity. My grandmother had legally added me to the deed. Someone had forged my signature to remove me. My parents had proceeded with selling the house to developers who planned to demolish it. The sale was scheduled to close in 5 days. My father's lawyer argued that I had abandoned any claim to the property by not asserting ownership for 10 years, that my parents had maintained and paid taxes on the house without contribution from me, and that the signature discrepancy was likely a misunderstanding, rather than fraud. Mark countered with evidence of the forgery, documentation of the house's historical significance, and testimony from Olivia Chen about the imminent filing for landmark status. Throughout the proceedings, I watched my sister's face as she absorbed the evidence. Her expression shifted from skepticism to shock, to something approaching anger, though I couldn't tell if it was directed at me or our parents. Finally, Judge Patel rendered her decision. I find sufficient evidence to maintain the injunction against the sale pending a full hearing on the merits. The evidence of potential forgery is concerning enough to warrant additional investigation. Moreover, The plaintiff has raised legitimate questions about the historical value of the property which deserve consideration. She fixed my parents with a stern look. Mr. and Mrs. Miller, I strongly suggest you consider mediation with your daughter rather than protracted litigation. Family disputes of this nature rarely end well in court. Then she turned to me. Ms. Miller, while your legal position appears sound, I urge you to consider that relationships are often worth more than property. My clerk will set a follow-up hearing for next month, by which time I hope you'll have reached a settlement. Outside the courtroom, Sarah approached me while our parents huddled with their lawyer. Did they really forge your signature? She asked quietly. I nodded. The expert testimony is clear. Someone did. And they've been planning to sell for at least 3 months without telling me. Sarah looked troubled. I knew they were talking about selling, but I had no idea about any of this deed stuff, or that they were selling to developers who would tear it down. She paused. Jess, that house, all our childhood memories, everything, they were just going to let it be destroyed without even telling you? Apparently, I said, the hurt still fresh despite our courtroom victory. Sarah squeezed my arm. I'm sorry I doubted you. They're our parents. I never thought they'd do something like this. Neither did I admitted. Our conversation was interrupted when my father stormed over, my mother trailing behind him with a worried expression. I hope you're satisfied, he snapped. You've just cost us $1 million deal and dragged this family's dirty laundry through a public courtroom. Congratulations. Dad, Don't, he cut me off. You've made your choice. Now we'll make ours. He turned to Sarah. Are you coming? Sarah hesitated, looking between us. Actually, I think I'll stay and talk to Jessica a bit longer. My father's expression hardened further. Fine. Both my daughters against me. Perfect. He strode away, my mother following after. One last pained glance in my direction. He'll calm down, Sarah said, not sounding entirely convinced. They both will. This is just a lot. I never wanted it to be like this, I said, watching my parents leave. All I wanted was to protect the house. If they'd just talked to me. I know, Sarah sighed. But now what? The sale is blocked, but nothing's really resolved. Mark, who had been giving us space, approached with Olivia Chen beside him. Actually, I might have a path forward, Olivia said. The Preservation Board reviewed your documentation and agrees the Miller House has significant historical value. They've fast-tracked the landmark status application, which could be approved within weeks rather than months. What does that mean practically? Sarah asked. It means the house can't be demolished or substantially altered, regardless of who owns it, Olivia explained, which eliminates the developer's interest but opens up other possibilities, including preservation buyers who specifically look for landmark properties. My parents are counting on that money for retirement, I said, troubled despite our legal victory. If we find a buyer who'll preserve the house but can't match Westbrook's offer. That's where the tax incentives and preservation grants come in, Olivia continued. A landmark designation makes the property eligible for several programs that could make up much of the difference for the right buyer. Mark nodded. It could be a win-win. Your parents get their retirement money, and the house is preserved. If they're willing to work with us, I pointed out. You saw how Dad stormed out. Sarah squared her shoulders. Let me talk to them. They might listen to me since I'm not directly involved in the lawsuit. At least I can try to make them understand you're not just being difficult. You're trying to find a solution that works for everyone. For the first time in days, I felt a glimmer of hope. You'd do that? Of course, it's our family home too. Sarah hugged me. Besides, when I really think about it, I don't want some soulless condos replacing the house where we grew up either. Over the next week, a fragile negotiation took shape. Sarah acted as intermediary since our parents refused to speak to me directly. The Preservation Board expedited the landmark status application, and Olivia identified 3 potential conservation buyers who specialized in historically significant properties. My parents remained adamant about the sale price. They needed the full $950,000 for their retirement plans, but gradually became more open to alternative buyers as the reality of the injunction sank in. The breakthrough came when one buyer, a couple who restored historical homes as boutique bed and breakfasts, offered $900,000 with the possibility of additional preservation grants, bringing the total to $945,000. Only $5,000 short of the original deal, but with the guarantee that the house would not only survive but be lovingly restored. Sarah called me with cautious optimism. "They're considering it. Dad's still angry, but Mom's starting to come around." She asked if the new owners would let her see the restoration work when it's done. "Of course they would," I said eagerly. "The Brysons are preservationists. They'd probably love to have Mom's input about the house's history." "There's something else," Sarah hesitated. "Mom mentioned that she found an old folder in her desk recently. Papers from when Grandma died. She says there was a letter addressed to you that she never gave you." My heart skipped. "A letter from Grandma Eleanor?" "Apparently. Mom was vague about it, but I think she's feeling guilty. Not just about the letter, but about everything. She asked if you might be willing to meet with her, just her, not Dad, at neutral territory." I agreed immediately, and the next day, found myself at the Japanese Garden in Washington Park, my mother's favorite place in Portland. She was waiting on a bench near the koi pond, looking older and more vulnerable than I remembered. "Jessica," she said, rising as I approached. "Thank you for coming." I sat beside her, maintaining a careful distance. "Sarah said you found a letter from Grandma?" She nodded, pulling an envelope from her purse. The paper had yellowed slightly with age, my name written in my grandmother's distinctive handwriting across the front. "I should have given this to you 10 years ago," my mother said quietly, "when we found it among her things after the funeral. But I read it first, and—" She trailed off, looking ashamed. "And?" I prompted. "And I was angry. At my mother, for going behind our backs. At you, for being her favorite. At the whole situation." She handed me the envelope. "I hid it from your father. He never knew about it. Or about your name being on the deed. I was the one who handled the quitclaim deed." The admission hung in the air between us. My mother, not my father, had forged my signature. "Why?" I asked, the single word containing all my hurt and confusion. Tears filled her eyes. "Your father's business was struggling more than we let on. The pandemic hit his clients hard. Our retirement accounts took a major hit. When the real estate market boomed, selling the house seemed like our only option for a secure retirement." She twisted her hands in her lap. "When we found out about your name on the deed, it was by accident when we first met with the real estate agent. I panicked. I knew you'd never agree to let it be demolished." "You could have talked to me," I said. "We could have looked for preservation buyers from the start." "I know that now, but at the time, all I could see was our financial security slipping away." She wiped at her tears. "I told myself it was just a house, that memories matter more than buildings. I was wrong." I opened the envelope carefully and unfolded my grandmother's letter. Her familiar handwriting blurred through my own tears as I read, "My dearest Jessica, if you're reading this, I'm no longer with you. I've made arrangements with my lawyer to add your name to the deed of our family home, alongside your parents. I've watched your love for this house grow since you were small, how you notice every detail, how you understand its soul in a way that reminds me of myself at your age. Your mother and father are good people who have given this house a happy chapter in its long story. But they don't see what you and I see, the history in every corner, the craftsmanship worth preserving, the legacy beyond mere property value. This house has sheltered our family through wars, depressions, celebrations, and sorrows. It has stories in its walls that deserve to continue. I trust you to be the guardian of those stories and of the house itself, whatever form that takes, in your lifetime. This is not a burden I place on you, but a gift and a trust. Whatever happens, know that I believe in you and your understanding of why places like this matter. With all my love, Grandma Eleanor. I folded the letter carefully, too overwhelmed to speak immediately. She knew, my mother said softly. Even then, she knew you were the one who would fight for it. I wish you'd shown me this 10 years ago, I finally managed. So much could have been different. I know. I've made so many mistakes, Jessica. The forgery, I told myself it was for our security, but it was wrong. Deeply wrong. She looked at me directly. I don't expect forgiveness, but I want you to know I'm going to accept the Brysons' offer. I've already called their agent. The house will be preserved, just as Mother wanted, just as you want. And Dad? She sighed. He'll come around, eventually. The difference is only $5,000, and I think he's beginning to understand what we almost lost. Not just the house, but you. We sat in silence for a while, watching the koi fish glide beneath the surface of the pond. The breach between us wasn't healed. Forgery and months of deception couldn't be erased by one conversation. But something had shifted. A beginning, perhaps, of whatever our relationship might become after this. Will you show me the preservation plans? My mother asked eventually. For the house? I'd like to understand what made it so important to you and Mother. It was a small olive branch, but I took it. I'd like that. And maybe we could walk through it together one last time before the sale? To say goodbye properly? She nodded, tentatively reaching for my hand. I'd like that very much. As we left the garden together, I thought about my grandmother's words, about being a guardian of stories, about understanding why places matter. The house would be saved, but our family had been forever changed by this conflict. There would be difficult conversations ahead, especially with my father. Trust to rebuild, hurts to heal. But looking at my mother walking beside me, I felt something my grandmother might have recognized. The bittersweet understanding that preserving what matters sometimes requires letting go of what doesn't. That some foundations can be repaired, while others need to be completely rebuilt. The family home would continue its story without us, but with its character and history intact. And perhaps, in time, our family would find its own form of preservation, not perfect restoration to what was before, but an honest reconstruction that honored the past while making space for a different future. After hanging up, I sat in my car looking at the house. My grandmother's house, my mother's house, briefly my house too, and soon to be the Brysons' house. The landmark designation felt like a final victory, a vindication of everything I'd fought for. I took a photo of the house with my phone, capturing it in the golden afternoon light. One last image to remember it exactly as it had been in our care. 3 days later, I stood in the corner of a conference room at Pacific Northwest Title and Escrow, watching as my parents signed the final paperwork transferring ownership to the Brysons. My father had insisted I attend. Since you inserted yourself into this transaction, you might as well see it through. His first direct communication with me in weeks. The closing was mercifully brief. The stack of documents prepared in advance. Everyone eager to complete the transaction with minimal fuss. The Brysons were warm but professional. My parents polite but reserved. Only when the final signatures were complete and the escrow agent announced, "Congratulations, the house is officially sold," did I see my mother's composure crack slightly, a tremor in her hand as she returned the pen. James Bryson, perhaps sensing the emotional undercurrent, handed my parents an envelope. "A small gift," he explained. "We'd like to honor your family's stewardship of the home." Inside was a professionally designed certificate commemorating the Miller family's 78 years of ownership, along with a promise that a plaque in the entryway would acknowledge them as the family who had preserved the house through most of the 20th century. It was a thoughtful gesture that seemed to genuinely touch my father, whose rigid posture softened slightly as he thanked them. Outside the office, as the Brysons drove away with their new house keys, my father turned to me directly for the first time that day. "Well, you got what you wanted. The house is saved." His tone was neutral rather than accusatory, progress of a sort. "We all got something important," I replied carefully. "You and Mom got your retirement funds. The house got protection. The Brysons got a property they'll treasure." "And what did you get, Jessica?" he asked, something almost curious in his expression. The question caught me off guard. What had I gained from this painful, divisive process? Peace of mind, I suppose. Knowing Grandma Eleanor's wishes were honored. Knowing a piece of our city's architectural heritage will survive. My father studied me for a long moment. "You're more like my mother-in-law than I ever realized. She was just as stubborn about that house." Something that might have been respect flickered across his face. The Brysons seem like good people. Better than some faceless development corporation, I'll grant you that. It wasn't forgiveness or reconciliation, but it felt like a tiny crack in the wall between us. An acknowledgement, however grudging, that perhaps the outcome wasn't entirely negative. "Dad, Your mother and I are heading to Arizona tomorrow to close on the condo," he interrupted, not ready for whatever I'd been about to say. "Sarah's driving us to the airport. We'll be back in 3 weeks to finish packing." "Let me know if you need any help," I offered, knowing he wouldn't accept but making the gesture anyway. He nodded stiffly, then joined my mother who was waiting by their car. She waved at me with a small, sad smile as they drove away. Standing in the parking lot, I felt strangely untethered. The weeks of legal battles, emotional confrontations, and frantic research had consumed all my energy. Now that it was over, the house sold but preserved, my parents angry but communicating, my relationship with them damaged but not destroyed, I wasn't sure what came next. My phone rang, Olivia Chen's name lighting up the screen. "Just checking in," she said when I answered. "How did the closing go?" "As well as could be expected," I replied. "Civilized, at least. I have some news that might cheer you up. The chairperson of the Preservation Board was impressed with your research and documentation on the Miller House. They're looking for a project consultant for the Historical Neighborhood Initiative, someone to identify other potentially significant properties that might qualify for landmark status before developers can target them." "That sounds exactly like something I'd love," I admitted. The prospect of channeling my passion for preservation into a broader effort to protect Portland's architectural heritage was appealing, a positive direction after weeks of conflict. "There's a meeting next Thursday if you're interested. It would be a 6-month contract to start, with the possibility of extension." I agreed immediately, already mentally cataloging neighborhoods with vulnerable historic properties. This was how I could expand what I'd done for my family home, identifying and protecting other buildings with stories worth preserving before they were threatened. That evening, Sarah called with an update. "Mom and Dad are all packed for Arizona. Mom seems better, excited about the condo even. She mentioned that the Brysons invited them to see the renovation progress whenever they're back in Portland." "And Dad?" I asked cautiously. Sarah hesitated. "Working through it. He asked if you'd be at my house for dinner when they get back from Arizona. I think that's his way of extending an olive branch." "Of course I'll be there," I said, relief washing through me. My father wasn't one for direct apologies or emotional conversations. An invitation to dinner was his version of a peace offering. "Give them time, Jess. This was a major upheaval for them. Not just the house, but realizing Mom forged your signature. dealing with the court case, having their retirement plans upended. They're trying to process it all. I know, I sighed. I just wish they'd talked to me from the beginning. We could have avoided all of this. True, but then the house might be a pile of rubble by now, with condos going up in its place. Sarah's pragmatism was always refreshing. Sometimes the messy path leads to the better outcome. The next few weeks passed in a flurry of activity. I threw myself into research for the preservation board position, mapping vulnerable properties throughout Portland's historic neighborhoods. Olivia introduced me to her network of preservation advocates, architects specializing in restoration, and city officials involved in historical zoning. The work was exactly what I needed, a productive channel for the same determination that had driven me to protect my childhood home, but without the personal pain. Each property I identified and researched was another potential victory for the city's architectural heritage, another family home or neighborhood landmark that might be spared the developer's wrecking ball. 3 weeks after the closing, Sarah hosted the promised dinner at her house. I arrived early to help prepare, my stomach in knots at the prospect of facing my father in a social setting after everything that had happened. "Relax," Sarah advised, handing me a glass of wine. "Mom says he's been much better since they found the condo. Apparently it has a golf course view and a community woodworking shop. He's already talking about making furniture." Dad? Making furniture? I couldn't imagine my business-focused father embracing such a hands-on hobby. Sarah shrugged. People change. Maybe retirement will soften his edges. When my parents arrived, the initial moments were awkward. Careful hugs with my mother, a stiff nod from my father. But as the evening progressed, the familiar rhythm of family dinner gradually eased the tension. My mother shared enthusiastic descriptions of their Arizona condo, my father occasionally interjecting with unexpectedly positive comments about the community they'd joined. "There's a whole woodworking club," he mentioned, confirming Sarah's earlier comment. Men who spent their careers in offices, now building things with their hands. "I've signed up for a beginner's class next month." "That sounds perfect for you, Dad," I said, genuinely pleased at the thought of him finding a creative outlet in retirement. He studied me for a moment. "Your grandmother's husband, your grandfather Johnson, he was a woodworker. Made half the built-ins in that house himself. Eleanor always said I didn't appreciate craftsmanship." A hint of self-deprecation colored his tone. Maybe she was right. The mention of my grandmother without bitterness felt significant. After dinner, while Sarah and my mother cleared the table, my father gestured for me to join him on the back porch. The spring evening was mild, twilight settling over Sarah's garden where her children's toys lay scattered on the lawn. We stood in silence for a few moments before he spoke. "Your mother told me about the letter from Eleanor." I nodded, uncertain where he was going with this. "She also told me she was the one who handled the quitclaim deed, not me." He looked uncomfortable but determined to continue. "I want you to know I wasn't aware of that. The forgery. I would never have condoned it if I'd known." "I believe you," I said, and I did. My father was many things, stubborn, sometimes difficult, occasionally insensitive, but not dishonest. That had always been his core principle in business and, in life, straightforward dealings, for better or worse. The situation with the house, he hesitated, clearly choosing his words carefully. "I still believe we had the right to sell our home without interference, but I've come to see that the way it happened was problematic." Coming from my father, this qualified acknowledgement was equivalent to a profound apology. I accepted it as such. "I never wanted to cause problems for you and Mom," I said. "I just couldn't stand by and watch the house be demolished. Not when I knew what it meant to Grandma Eleanor, what it means to our family history." He nodded slowly. "The Brysons called last week, asked for historical information about some of the original features. when they described their restoration plans. He cleared his throat. Well, it sounds like they'll do right by the place. Better than a cookie-cutter condo development would have. Much better, I agreed. And now that it has landmark status, it's protected for future generations too. You're doing, he acknowledged, with what might have been the ghost of a smile. Stubborn as a miller should be. It wasn't complete reconciliation, but it was a beginning. A recognition that while the conflict had been painful, perhaps the outcome wasn't entirely wrong. We rejoined my mother and Sarah inside, the evening ending with tentative plans for my parents' next visit from Arizona. The following week brought a surprising invitation. The Brysons had begun initial preservation work on the house and wanted to give my family a private tour before the major renovations started, a chance to see what features they were uncovering and preserving. They found something they think might interest us particularly, my mother explained over the phone. Something behind the wallpaper in what used to be the library. Curiosity piqued, I agreed to meet my parents at the house that Saturday. The weather had turned glorious, a perfect Portland spring day with cherry blossoms drifting through sunshine as I parked in front of the familiar Craftsman. The house looked exactly the same from the outside, but a construction dumpster in the driveway, and the sound of activity inside signaled the beginning of its transformation. Eleanor Bryson greeted us warmly at the door, dressed in practical work clothes with her silver hair tied back in a bandana. Thank you all for coming. We're so excited to show you what we've discovered. Inside, the house was a careful work zone. Plastic sheeting protected the original hardwood floors, and painter's tape marked areas of particular historical interest. A team of specialized restoration experts was documenting each original feature before work began, photographing, measuring, creating detailed records to ensure accurate preservation. We always do a complete historical assessment before starting actual construction, James explained as he joined us. Often we find surprises once we start looking beneath the surface. They led us to the library, a warm room lined with built-in bookshelves that had been my father's home office during my childhood. The wallpaper, a subdued pattern from the 1970s that my mother had chosen during their early years in the house, had been partially removed, revealing an unexpected discovery beneath. We found these behind the wallpaper, Eleanor said, gesturing to the exposed wall. There, written directly on the plaster in different handwritings and colors, were dozens of signatures, dates, and short messages, a hidden record of the home's inhabitants stretching back to its construction in 1923. It appears to have been a tradition, James explained. Each family that lived here signed the wall before adding their own wallpaper or paint. Some added little notes or drawings. We think it's extraordinary. My mother stepped closer, examining the faded markings with wonder. I had no idea these were here. We just papered over the old wallpaper when we moved in. I studied the earliest signatures. The original owners, the Winters family, had signed in elegant script. Frederick and May Winters, with children Frederick Jr. and Eleanor, March 1923. Eleanor? I looked at my mother. Like Grandma? She nodded slowly. Yes. My mother was named after the daughter of the man who built this house. Frederick Winters was the architect, and my grandfather bought it from him in the 40s. The families knew each other through church. This connection, this thread through generations, felt profoundly significant. I traced the next set of signatures. Henry and Rose Johnson, with daughter Eleanor, June 1945. My grandparents and my mother as a young girl signing their names in this very room nearly 80 years ago. Below them, in a child's careful printing, Eleanor Johnson, age 12, 1957, and then again, Eleanor Johnson, Sweet 16, 1961. My grandmother had continued the tradition throughout her childhood and youth. And then, in familiar handwriting that made my throat tighten with emotion, Robert and Linda Miller, with daughters Sarah and Jessica, August 1980. My family's mark, made when I was just 4 years old. My name likely written by my mother's hand since I would have been too young to write it myself. I didn't remember the moment, but here was proof of our place in the home's lineage, our addition to its ongoing story. "We'd like your family to sign again," Eleanor Bryson said softly. "Before we preserve this wall beneath clear archival panels, complete the circle before we become the next caretakers to add our names." My father, who had been unusually quiet during the tour, stepped forward to examine the wall of signatures. His expression was complicated: nostalgia, regret, and something that might have been acceptance all mingled in his features. "You should sign first, Jessica," he said, surprising us all. "You're the one who made sure this wall, this history, survived." Tears pricked at my eyes as the Brysons offered a selection of archival markers. My hand trembled slightly as I wrote, "Jessica Miller, Guardian of Memory, May 2023. My mother went next, then my father, and finally, after being called on FaceTime, to participate virtually, Sarah added her name from her home in Seattle, the Brysons holding the phone while she directed my mother's hand to write her signature by proxy. "The Bryson family will add ours next," James said. "And hopefully, many families after us will continue the tradition. This wall is now part of our restoration plan. We'll create a special display explaining its significance to guests." We continued the tour, seeing the careful documentation of original light fixtures, the discovery of hand-painted stenciling beneath layers of kitchen paint, the preservation of the unique maple flooring in the upstairs hallway. I watched my parents' reactions. My mother moved through the house with visible nostalgia, but also growing enthusiasm about its future iteration. My father, though more reserved, asked surprisingly detailed questions about the restoration techniques. By the end of the tour, something had shifted in their relationship to the house. No longer merely the property they'd reluctantly sold, it had become a legacy they'd contributed to. One part of a much longer story that would continue beyond them. "We'd like to invite your family to the ribbon cutting when we open next spring," Eleanor said as we prepared to leave. "As the longest residing family in the house's history, it would mean a great deal to have you there." My mother agreed immediately. Even my father nodded, though he qualified it with, "if we're not traveling." Outside, as the Brysons returned to their work, my parents and I stood on the sidewalk looking up at the house that had been the center of so much conflict between us. "I think they'll do right by it," my father said, echoing his comment from Sarah's dinner. But this time it carried no hint of grudging acceptance, just a simple acknowledgement of a positive outcome. "Better than right," my mother added. "They see all the things that made it special to us, to your grandmother." She touched my arm, lightly. "To you." "I'm glad you got to see the signatures," I said. "That connection through generations." My father cleared his throat. "Your grandmother Johnson once told me something I didn't understand at the time. She said houses have souls built from the lives lived within them. Seemed like sentimental nonsense to me then." He gazed up at the distinctive craftsman roofline. Perhaps I was too quick to dismiss the idea. Coming from my pragmatic, unsentimental father, this philosophical musing was extraordinary, evidence of genuine reflection on the values that had driven our conflict. "The condo in Arizona," he continued after a moment. "It's a practical place to retire. Good amenities, sensible layout, proper insulation, but it's not." He gestured vaguely at the house. "It doesn't have a soul yet," my mother finished for him. "We'll have to give it one." "Well," my father said briskly, returning to his more characteristic practical tone, "at least we won't have to worry about 100-year-old plumbing or drafty windows. There are advantages to new construction." I smiled, recognizing the deflection for what it was. Not a rejection of the emotional significance of our old home, but his way of processing it while maintaining his dignity. as they prepared to leave for their temporary rental before returning. To Arizona, my mother hugged me properly, not the careful, awkward embrace of recent weeks, but something closer to our old relationship. "Thank you," she whispered, "for fighting for this. I didn't understand then, but I do now." My father offered his hand formally, then, in a surprising gesture, pulled me into a brief, stiff hug. "Stubborn," he muttered, but the word carried a hint of pride rather than criticism. Watching them drive away, I felt a sense of closure that had been missing at the formal closing weeks earlier. The house would continue without us, but it would carry our story within its walls, literally, in the form of our signatures and figuratively in the legacy of care that had preserved it for the next chapter. The next day, I received an unexpected email from the Preservation Board. In addition to the consultant position Olivia had mentioned, they were creating a new educational initiative, a program to help homeowners understand the historical significance of their properties and navigate the landmark designation process. They wanted me to lead it, based on my thorough research and passionate advocacy for the Miller House. It felt like the perfect next step, a way to transform my personal battle into a broader mission, helping other families recognize and protect the architectural heritage in their own homes before they faced the crisis that had divided mine. I accepted immediately, already envisioning workshops, walking tours, and resources that would celebrate Portland's historical buildings while providing practical paths to preservation. That evening, I called my grandmother's former attorney, a man in his 70s now but still practicing. I'd been meaning to thank him for maintaining the record of my addition to the deed all these years. Eleanor Johnson was very clear about her wishes, he told me. She said her granddaughter was the one who truly saw the house's value, beyond mere property or investment. She believed you would fight for it if necessary. "I just wish the fight hadn't caused so much damage to my relationship with my parents," I admitted. "Families are complicated," he said, the wisdom of decades in family law evident in his tone. "But they're also remarkably resilient. Your grandmother knew the deed change might cause conflict someday, but she also believed the house was worth protecting. From what you've told me, it seems she was right on both counts." Later that week, I revisited the house one final time, not for an official tour or family event, but simply to walk past on a quiet evening, seeing it from the sidewalk, as I had countless times growing up. The work had progressed. Scaffolding now surrounded parts of the exterior where the Brysons' team was carefully restoring the original siding and trim details. As I stood there, Eleanor Bryson emerged from the front door, spotted me, and waved me over. "Perfect timing. We just uncovered something else I think you'll find interesting." She led me to the back garden where workers had removed an overgrown hedge to reveal a hidden feature. A small stone bench built into an alcove, weathered but intact. Carved into the stone was a single line: "Remember those who came before. Honor those who will come after." "We think it dates to the original construction," Eleanor explained. "It was completely concealed by decades of growth. We're restoring it as a meditation spot in the garden." The sentiment struck me as the perfect distillation of what preservation truly meant. Not just maintaining old buildings for nostalgia's sake, but honoring the continuum of human experience they represented, the countless lives and stories contained within their walls. Standing in the garden where I had played as a child, looking at this hidden philosophical statement that had waited patiently for a century to be rediscovered, I felt a sense of rightness settle over me. The house would continue its journey without the Miller family, but we had done our part in its long story, protecting it, caring for it, and ultimately ensuring it would endure for generations to come. My phone buzzed with a text from my mother. The Brysons sent more photos of their restoration plans. "Dad actually seems interested. Progress. Dinner when we're back in town next month?" I smiled as I replied with a simple, "Yes," feeling the fragile bonds of family beginning to mend even as our relationship to this particular house transformed into something new. A shared history rather than a shared future, but no less meaningful for the change. As twilight deepened around the grand old craftsman, I took one final photograph, capturing not just the house itself, but the new bench in the foreground, its message of continuity and responsibility now revealed after decades in hiding. The perfect metaphor for what this journey had taught me about family, heritage, and the unexpected ways the past reaches forward to shape our future. 6 months later, I stood at the podium in Portland City Hall's council chambers, nervously adjusting my notes as the room filled with preservation advocates, neighborhood representatives, and concerned homeowners. The autumn sunlight streamed through the tall windows, illuminating the historic chamber with its ornate woodwork and brass fixtures, a fitting venue for the city's first residential heritage protection forum. "Good morning, everyone," I began, my voice steadier than I felt. "Thank you for joining us today for this important conversation about Portland's architectural heritage and how we can work together to protect it." The forum was the culmination of my work with the Preservation Board over the past months, a comprehensive initiative to help homeowners understand the historical significance of their properties and navigate the often complex landmark designation process. What had begun as a personal battle to save my childhood home had evolved into a mission to empower others facing similar challenges. "Every historic home in Portland tells a story," I continued, settling into the presentation I had rehearsed for weeks. "These stories form the fabric of our neighborhoods, our cultural identity, and our shared history. Today, we'll explore practical tools to preserve these stories while balancing the realities of homeownership in the 21st century." From my position at the podium, I could see the Brysons seated in the front row, alongside Olivia Chen from the Preservation Board. In the middle of the audience, surprisingly, sat my parents. They had flown in from Arizona specifically for this event, a gesture of support that meant more than they could know. The forum covered everything from the technical aspects of landmark designation to financial incentives for preservation, from dealing with developers to forming neighborhood advocacy groups. I shared my own experience as a case study, carefully anonymizing certain details out of respect for my family's privacy, but using the lessons learned to illustrate both the challenges and rewards of preservation advocacy. "The key is early intervention," I explained during the Q&A session. "Often, by the time a historic property is under immediate threat from developers, options are limited and time is critical. Our goal today is to help you identify significant properties proactively and begin the preservation process before crisis strikes." A woman in her 60s raised her hand. "My husband and I own a 1905 Victorian in Irvington. We love its character, but we're concerned about the restrictions landmark status might place on future renovations." How restrictive is the designation, really? It was a common question, reflecting the fundamental tension between preservation and practical home ownership. "That's an excellent question," I replied. "Landmark designation doesn't freeze a house in time or prevent all modifications. It's designed to protect the character-defining features while allowing sensible updates for modern living." I gestured to Eleanor Bryson. "We're fortunate to have with us today the new owner of a recently designated landmark property who can speak directly to this balance. Eleanor, would you mind sharing your experience with the Miller House renovation?" Eleanor joined me at the IEA podium, her enthusiasm for historical architecture immediately evident. "Our project is actually a perfect example of this balance," she explained. "We're converting a 1923 Craftsman into a bed and breakfast, which requires significant interior modifications for guest accommodations. The landmark designation protects the exterior appearance and certain significant interior features, but we're working closely with the Preservation Office to incorporate modern amenities where needed." She clicked through several slides showing the renovation progress, the carefully restored original windows, the updated kitchen that maintained the historic cabinet layout while incorporating modern appliances, the new bathroom fixtures designed to complement the home's original style. "The misconception is that landmark status means you can't change anything," she continued. The reality is that it ensures changes are thoughtful and in keeping with the property's historical character. It's a conversation, not a prohibition. By the time the forum concluded 3 hours later, we had covered everything from tax incentives to contractor recommendations, from research methodologies to community organizing tactics. People lingered afterward, sharing stories of their own historic homes and forming connections with neighbors facing similar preservation challenges. My parents approached as I packed up my materials, my father looking slightly out of place in a room full of preservation enthusiasts, but making the effort nonetheless. That was illuminating, he said, his standard understated praise. You presented the practical aspects well, the tax benefits particularly. I smiled, recognizing his attempt to connect with the parts of preservation that aligned with his pragmatic worldview. Thanks, Dad. I thought you might appreciate that section. The Miller House slides were lovely, my mother added, referring to the before and after images Eleanor had shared. The restoration is coming along beautifully, almost makes me wish. She stopped herself, a flicker of nostalgia crossing her face before she brightened again. Well, it's rewarding to see it in such good hands. The Brysons invited us to dinner tonight, I mentioned, to thank you both for sharing family photos and historical information about the house. Mom stepped in with her solution. I finished for him, pieces falling into place. But why tell me this now? My father looked directly at me, more vulnerable than I'd ever seen him. Because I owe you the truth, and because I've come to understand that your grandmother was right, about the house, about you. He cleared his throat. I've spent my life focused on financial security, practical decisions. Eleanor always accused me of having no poetry in my soul. The phrase made me smile, sounding exactly like my grandmother. She wasn't entirely wrong, he continued. But seeing what's happened with the house, how it's being honored, preserved, its story continuing, I'm beginning to understand what she valued, what you value. It was perhaps the most honest conversation we'd ever had. Thank you for telling me, I said quietly. I'm not good at apologies, he acknowledged stiffly. But I am sorry for dismissing your connection to the house, for not respecting Eleanor's wishes, for not seeing what was in front of me all along. Before I could respond, my mother appeared at his elbow. What are you two conspiring about over here? She asked lightly. My father simply said, just making peace with the past, and offered her his arm to leave. As we departed the restaurant, stepping into the cool Portland evening, Eleanor handed me a small wrapped package. A thank you gift, she explained, for everything you've done to help us understand and honor the house's history. I opened it later that night in my apartment, a beautifully framed architectural drawing of the Miller House as it had appeared when newly built in 1923, with a small brass plaque at the bottom that read, "Preserved through the dedication of the Miller family and the vision of Jessica Miller 2023. The thoughtful gift brought tears to my eyes. It would hang in my office at the preservation board, a daily reminder of what could be accomplished when passion met purpose, when the past was honored while embracing the future. The next morning, I met with the historical architect who was consulting on the Miller House restoration. She had requested my input on some original features that were being uncovered during the more extensive phase of the renovation. We found these behind the dining room wainscoting, she explained, showing me photographs of what appeared to be handwritten notes on the original plaster. Similar to the signatures wall in the library, but these are different. Looks like construction notes from the original builder. The photographs showed technical drawings and measurements, along with comments about materials and techniques. In the corner of one image, barely visible, was a small illustration of what appeared to be the stone bench I'd seen in the garden, with the same inscription about remembering those who came before and honoring those who would come after. Frederick Winters designed this house as a legacy, I murmured, piecing together the philosophy behind these hidden messages. He wasn't just building a structure, he was creating something meant to endure, to tell a story across generations. Exactly, the architect agreed. It's unusual to find this level of intentionality in residential architecture from that period. Most builders were focused on efficiency and profit, not embedding philosophical messages within the construction itself. The discovery reinforced everything I'd been advocating through my work with the Preservation Board. That historic homes were more than just old buildings. They were repositories of cultural values, artistic expression, and human stories that deserved protection. Later that day, I received a call from a city planner I'd met at the forum. "Jessica, we have a situation developing in Ladd's Addition. A developer has quietly purchased 3 adjacent craftsman bungalows and is preparing demolition permits. The neighborhood association just found out, and they're scrambling to respond." This was exactly the kind of preservation emergency our forum had been designed to address. "Send me the addresses. I'll pull the historical records and meet with the neighborhood representatives tomorrow." For the next 3 weeks, I worked intensively with the Ladd's Addition community, researching the historical significance of the threatened homes, organizing residents to attend public hearings, and helping them navigate the emergency landmark designation process. We discovered that one of the bungalows had been designed by the same architect as the Miller House, Frederick Winters, creating a compelling historical connection that strengthened the preservation case. The work was exhausting but exhilarating, each day bringing new challenges and opportunities to apply what I'd learned through my own experience. When the Landmarks Commission voted unanimously to grant emergency protection to all 3 properties, the victory felt as personal as the preservation of my own family home. "You've found your calling," Olivia observed as we celebrated with the neighborhood advocates. "Watching you work with these homeowners, you have a gift for translating preservation principles into action. You make people believe they can make a difference." "Because they can," I replied simply. "One person standing up for a single historic home can change the conversation about what we value as a community." As autumn deepened into winter, the Miller House restoration progressed steadily. The Brysons sent regular updates to my family, photographs of the meticulously restored exterior paint in the original 1923 color scheme, the refurbished leaded glass windows, the recreation of the original front garden design based on photographs my mother had provided. My parents, now settled in their Arizona condo, seemed genuinely interested in these updates. My father had even offered advice on restoring the library's built-in bookshelves, drawing on his newly developed woodworking knowledge. This engagement with the house's restoration had become a curious form of closure for them, a way to maintain a connection to the home they had left behind while embracing their new life. Sarah called one evening with surprising news. "Mom told me she's been working with a local historian in Arizona to document the history of their new community. Apparently, it was built on the site of an old ranch that has some significant stories attached to it. She's helping collect oral histories from longtime residents." I smiled at the image of my mother finding a new outlet for the appreciation of history that she had always possessed but rarely expressed. That sounds perfect for her. "Dad's apparently building a display case for some artifacts they've uncovered," Sarah continued, amusement in her voice. "Who are these people, and what have they done with our parents?" "Maybe this is who they always were," I suggested. "Or who they might have become sooner if we'd all communicated better about what really mattered to each of us." The observation lingered with me in the following days. How much of our family conflict could have been avoided with more open conversation? How many assumptions and misunderstandings had complicated what might have been a straightforward discussion about values and priorities? These reflections informed my approach to the growing preservation program. In each community meeting, each homeowner consultation, each workshop on historical significance, I emphasized the importance of early, honest communication among all stakeholders, family members, neighbors, developers, city officials. The technical aspects of preservation were important, but the human element, the relationships, the emotional connections to place, the shared values, was equally crucial. As the year drew to a close, the Brysons invited my family to a private preview of the nearly completed Miller House renovation. They had scheduled the official opening of the bed and breakfast for early spring, coinciding with the Heritage Home Tour, but wanted us to see it first, before it opened to the public. My parents flew in from Arizona for the occasion, and Sarah and her family drove down from Seattle, making it the first time we had all gathered at the house since before the sale. Standing on the familiar front porch, now meticulously restored to its original appearance, I felt a momentary disorientation. This place so familiar, yet no longer ours, simultaneously changed and unchanged. Eleanor opened the door with a warm, "Welcome," leading us into what had once been our home and was now transformed into an elegant historical accommodation. The essential character remained, the original woodwork gleaming with careful restoration, the leaded glass windows casting familiar patterns of light across the floors. The overall flow and proportion of the spaces preserved, but the function had evolved. The formal living room was now a common area for guests, furnished with period-appropriate antiques and subtle modern comforts. The dining room had been restored to its 1920s appearance, with the original built-in china cabinet now displaying historical photographs of the house and neighborhood. "They said you've been incredibly helpful with identifying original features." My father looked momentarily uncomfortable with the praise. "Just answering their questions. Your mother's the one who kept all the old photographs organized." "Oh, still, it means a lot to them," I said, "to have that continuity, that connection to the home's past." We walked together toward the exit, where Olivia was speaking with a city councilwoman about expanding the preservation program's funding. She excused herself to join us. "Jessica, the forum was exactly what we needed," she said warmly. "You've managed to translate complex preservation concepts into approachable, practical steps for homeowners. The councilwoman is impressed. She's suggesting we make this a quarterly event throughout the city." Pride bloomed in my chest. The work had become more fulfilling than I'd anticipated, combining my professional expertise in architecture with a newfound talent for education and advocacy. I'd be happy to develop a regular series, maybe rotate through different neighborhoods, focusing on the specific architectural styles and challenges in each area. "Perfect. Let's discuss details next week." Olivia nodded politely to my parents. "Mr. and Mrs. Miller, it's wonderful to see you again. Your daughter has become an invaluable asset to Portland's preservation community." My father, never comfortable with effusive praise, merely nodded, but my mother beamed. "We're very proud of her." The simple statement, delivered without qualification or hesitation, washed over me like a warm wave. 6 months ago, in the aftermath of our legal confrontation, such uncomplicated pride had seemed impossibly distant. The gradual healing of our family relationships had been as painstaking as the restoration of a historical home. Careful attention to damaged foundations, patient rebuilding of trust, the slow integration of new understanding with old bonds. Later that evening, I walked into Luca, one of Portland's finest Italian restaurants, for the dinner with the Brysons. The hostess led me to a private dining room in the back, where I was surprised to find not just my parents and the Brysons, but also Mark, Sarah, and her husband, who had flown in from Seattle, Olivia, and several other key people who had been involved in the Miller House preservation effort. "What's all this?" I asked, taking in the festive atmosphere and the congratulations banner hung across one wall. Eleanor Bryson approached with 2 flutes of champagne, handing one to me. "A celebration. We received the final landmark designation certificate today, and the Heritage Home Tour Committee has selected the Miller House as next year's featured property. It's official. The house is protected for generations to come." James raised his glass. "To the Miller House and to Jessica, without whom this architectural treasure might have been lost forever. As everyone clinked glasses, my father surprisingly spoke up. "If I may," he said, his formal tone commanding immediate attention. "I'd like to say something." The room quieted. My father had never been one for public speaking or emotional declarations, making this moment all the more unusual. "When we decided to sell our house," he began, then corrected himself, "our family home. When we decided to sell, I saw it purely as a financial transaction, a sensible decision for our retirement. What I failed to consider was the less tangible value of the property, its history, its significance." He seemed to be choosing his words with unusual care. "My daughter," he continued, glancing at me, "saw what I did not. While I cannot say I appreciated her methods at the time." A small ripple of knowing laughter moved through the room. "I must acknowledge that the outcome has proven to be better than I anticipated." He raised his glass slightly. "To my stubborn daughter, who fought for something she believed in. The house is better for it. And perhaps," he added with a hint of self-deprecation unusual for him, "so am I." The toast caught me completely off guard. My father had gradually warmed over the past months, our relationship slowly rebuilding through careful conversations and shared family gatherings. But this public acknowledgement, this admission that I had been right to fight for, the house, was unprecedented. My mother squeezed my hand under the table, her eyes shining with unshed tears. My sister Sarah mouthed "wow" from across the table, equally stunned by our father's uncharacteristic display. The dinner that followed was filled with conversation about the ongoing restoration, plans for the heritage tour, and the broader impact of the preservation initiative I'd helped launch. The Brysons shared updated photographs of their progress, including the meticulously restored front porch, the refurbished original light fixtures, and the garden where the hidden stone bench now formed the centerpiece of a meditation area. "We've incorporated the family signatures wall into the library design," Eleanor explained, showing us renderings of the space. "It will be protected behind museum-quality glass, with a small exhibit explaining the tradition and featuring photographs of the families who contributed to it over the years." "Including all of you," James added, looking around the table at my family. "We see ourselves as just the next caretakers in a long line. It's important to honor those who came before." As conversation flowed around me, I found myself reflecting on the journey of the past year. What had begun as an accidental discovery of betrayal had evolved into something I never could have predicted. Not just the preservation of a beloved family home, but the discovery of a new professional path and the painful but necessary restructuring of my family relationships. After dinner, as we prepared to leave, my father pulled me aside. "There's something else I wanted to tell you," he said, his voice low and uncharacteristically hesitant. "Something your mother doesn't even know yet." Intrigued, I followed him to a quiet corner away from the others. "What is it?" "I've been thinking about what you said at that first meeting with the lawyers, about your grandmother putting your name on the deed because she knew you would protect the house." He fidgeted with his watch strap, a nervous gesture I'd rarely seen from him. "The truth is, I did know about it. Not about the forgery, that was entirely your mother's doing, but about your name being on the deed." Shock rippled through me. "You knew? All along?" He nodded, looking uncomfortable. "Eleanor told me right after she did it. She was quite direct. Said she was ensuring the house would be protected even after she was gone, and that you were the one who would make sure of it." "And you never said anything? For 10 years? I assumed it was a sentimental gesture without legal weight. Eleanor was aging, becoming more concerned about her legacy." He sighed. "I never bothered to verify the legal details. When we decided to sell, I simply told the real estate agent to handle the paperwork. When they discovered the issue with the deed, my father's former office The library with the signatures wall had become a small museum space celebrating the home's history, complete with the promised display of family photographs and an interactive timeline of the property's evolution. "This is where we've placed the family continuity exhibit," James explained, leading us to a specially designed display case. Inside were artifacts from each era of the house's history: the original architect's compass, my grandmother's gardening journal, a small collection of my childhood drawings of the house that my mother had surprisingly contributed from her saved mementos. "We want guests to understand that staying here isn't just about experiencing a historic building," Eleanor explained. "It's about connecting with the layers of human experience that make it special. Every family that lived here added to its story." My mother moved through the spaces with visible emotion, occasionally reaching out to touch familiar features: the newel post at the bottom of the stairs, the window seat where she had read bedtime stories, the kitchen door frame with our childhood height markings that the Brysons had carefully preserved behind a frame rather than painting over. My father, typically more reserved, surprised me by engaging deeply with the technical aspects of the restoration, discussing the challenges of updating the electrical system while preserving original fixtures, the solutions for improving energy efficiency without compromising historical integrity, the craftsmanship involved in repairing rather than replacing the ornate ceiling medallions. "You've done remarkable work here," he told James with genuine admiration. "It would have been easier to gut it and start fresh inside." "Easier, but soulless," James replied. "The character of these old homes comes from the accumulated craftsmanship, the materials you simply can't find anymore, the proportions that modern construction has largely abandoned. We believe in honoring those elements even when it means more complex solutions." My father nodded thoughtfully. "I'm beginning to understand the value in that approach." The tour culminated in what had once been my childhood bedroom, now transformed into the Craftsman's Suite, the bed and breakfast's premium accommodation. The Brysons had maintained the room's essential character while adding luxury touches: a clawfoot tub in the ensuite bathroom, period-appropriate light fixtures with modern wiring, window treatments that matched the original 1920s style while providing modern light control. "This room has the best view of the garden," Eleanor explained, "especially the meditation area with the stone bench." I moved to the familiar window, looking out at the winter garden where the Japanese maple stood bare against the December sky. The stone bench now the centerpiece of a thoughtfully designed contemplative space. The inscription was visible even from this distance: "Remember those who came before, honor those who will come after." A philosophy that seemed to have guided the entire restoration process. "We've commissioned something for this room that we wanted to show you," James said, gesturing to a framed piece on the wall that I hadn't noticed upon entering. It was a beautifully executed architectural illustration of the house as seen from this very window perspective, showing the garden and stone bench below. But rather than depicting a single moment in time, the artist had created a layered image that showed the garden through different eras. The original 1923 design, my grandmother's, additions in the 1950s, my mother's gardens from my childhood, and the current restoration. The effect was a visual representation of continuity and change, tradition and evolution. "It's called Generations," Eleanor explained. "We've commissioned similar pieces for each room, each highlighting a different aspect of the house's history. This one seemed particularly appropriate for what was once Jessica's room, given her role in ensuring this newest chapter could unfold." My mother wiped away tears, and even my father looked moved by the thoughtful tribute. Sarah put her arm around my shoulders, whispering, "You did this. All of it might have been lost without you." After the tour concluded, the Brysons hosted a dinner for us in the formal dining room, the same room where countless Miller family celebrations had taken place over the decades. As we shared a meal in our former home, now transformed yet still somehow familiar, the conversation flowed with a warmth and ease that had been absent during the difficult months of conflict over the house's fate. "We have one more surprise," Eleanor announced as dessert was served. "The Heritage Home Tour Committee has asked if the Miller family would participate in the spring tour, not just allowing your names to be used in the historical materials, but actually being present to share firsthand memories with visitors." My mother immediately agreed, her earlier sadness about leaving the house now transformed into pride in its new incarnation. My father, predictably more hesitant, nevertheless nodded his assent. "I suppose I could explain some of the original construction details, if that would be useful." "It would be invaluable," James assured him. Visitors connect with personal stories in a way that's simply not possible through written materials alone. As the evening concluded and we prepared to leave, I lingered in the entryway, taking a final moment to absorb what the house had become. No longer our family home, but not erased either. Transformed, reimagined, its essential character preserved while its purpose evolved. Eleanor noticed my reflection. "It's strange, isn't it? Seeing it changed yet the same?" "Like watching a child grow up," I agreed. "Different but connected to who they've always been." "You know," she said thoughtfully, "in all our years of preservation work, we've never encountered a property with quite this combination of historical significance and family connection. Your advocacy didn't just save a building, it preserved a continuous thread of human experience that stretches back 100 years. Outside, my family waited on the porch, my parents standing together looking out at the neighborhood, Sarah explaining something about the restored woodwork to her husband. The image struck me as a perfect metaphor for what we had all experienced. Not the ending I had feared when I first overheard my parents discussing the sale, but a different kind, of continuation. Our family story evolving alongside but separate from the house that had once contained it. In the months that followed, my work with the Preservation Board expanded beyond Portland to neighboring communities facing similar development pressures on their historic neighborhoods. I developed educational materials, organized workshops, and advocated for policy changes that would better protect architectural heritage throughout the region. The experience with the Miller House had taught me that effective preservation wasn't just about technical designations or legal protections. It was about helping people understand the value of what might be lost, about connecting abstract concepts, like historical significance, to tangible human experiences and memories. When spring arrived, bringing the Heritage Home Tour weekend, I found myself standing on the front porch of the Miller House once again, this time as both a former resident and a preservation professional, welcoming visitors and sharing the story of how this particular craftsman had avoided the developer's wrecking ball. My parents had flown in for the event, my father surprising me with his enthusiastic participation. He stationed himself in the library, explaining the original construction techniques to fascinated visitors, pointing out how the Brysons' restoration had honored the original craftsmanship while subtly incorporating modern necessities. My mother, meanwhile, held court in the garden, sharing stories about the plants her mother had introduced, the family gatherings that had taken place on the lawn, the bird species that had nested in the Japanese maple over the decades. Her connection to the property, once complicated by the difficult circumstances of the sale, had transformed into a proud association with its new incarnation. During a quiet moment between tour groups, my father joined me on the front porch. "Your grandmother would approve," he said, gesturing toward the newly installed landmark plaque beside the front door. "Of all of this." "I think so too," I agreed. "She was right, you know, about you being the one who would protect it." He cleared his throat. "And I was wrong to dismiss that. We all did the best we could with what we understood at the time," I said, the perspective of months having softened the sharp edges of hurt and betrayal. "Even Mom with the forgery, she thought she was securing your future together." "A questionable method," he acknowledged with surprising humor, "but yes, her heart was in the right place." He looked out at the neighborhood, where several other historic homes displayed tour flags, their owners now engaged in the preservation process thanks in part to the initiatives I had helped develop. You've created something important here, Jessica. Something beyond just this house. It was perhaps the most direct praise he had ever offered me, and it landed with a weight that brought unexpected tears to my eyes. Thank you, Dad. Later, that afternoon, as the tour concluded, I found myself in what had once been my childhood bedroom, now the craftsman's suite where Eleanor had hung the generations' artwork. A small group of visitors listened attentively as I explained how my grandmother had added my name to the deed, how I had discovered my parents' plans to sell to developers, and how the ensuing conflict had ultimately led to the house's preservation and my current work in architectural advocacy. It must have been difficult, one woman commented, fighting your own parents over the house. It was, I acknowledged. Family relationships are complex, and we all had valid perspectives and needs. My parents genuinely needed to fund their retirement. I genuinely needed to honor my grandmother's wishes and preserve this architectural legacy. Finding the path that served both purposes wasn't easy, but ultimately, it led to an outcome that none of us could have envisioned. "And your relationship with your parents now?" she asked. I glanced out the window, where my father was showing a group of visitors the stone bench in the garden, gesturing animatedly as he explained the hidden inscription. The man who had once dismissed the house as just a building, now passionately advocating for its philosophical significance. "Changed," I said truthfully. Tested by conflict, but ultimately strengthened by finding a resolution that honored everyone's core needs, if not their initial positions. Much like this house, adapted to new purposes while maintaining its essential character. As the final visitors departed and the Brysons hosted a small reception for those who had participated in the tour, I found myself reflecting on the journey of the past year. From the shock of overhearing my parents' plans to sell our family home without telling me, to the discovery of my name on the deed, through the painful confrontation and legal battle, to this moment of celebration and new purpose, it had been a path I never could have anticipated. The house had been saved, yes, but so much more had been gained in the process. A deeper understanding between family members, a new professional direction for me, a stronger commitment to preservation throughout the community, and a model for how historic properties could find new life while honoring their past. Standing in what had once been our family home, surrounded by people who valued its history and celebrated its future, I understood that what we had preserved wasn't just a building. It was a continuum of human experience, a physical embodiment of the inscription on the garden bench, remembering those who came before, honoring those who would come after. My name might have been on the deed that saved the Miller house from demolition, but the true deed, the responsibility of stewardship, of carrying forward something valuable from the past into the future, belonged to all of us who recognized that some legacies transcend simple ownership. They become part of a shared heritage that enriches us all, connecting generations through the stories embedded in the places we call home. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.